Chapter 38. The Minister of State. I was born beneath the aspect of a bright-eyed star, and my triumphant adamant of soul is but the fixed persuasion of success. Richelieu, Act 3, Scene 1. Elif Ruoth Jovanadus was a man whose appearance would have elicited universal attention among the proudest imperial courts or most distinguished legislatures assemblies on earth. Of tall stature, majestic presence, and stately bearing, he might have found his earthly counterpart in Constantine the Great, Charlemagne le Grand, or Harold, the last of the Saxon kings. His head was like that of a Capitolian Jove, its raven locks streaked with iron gray, descending in leonine masses to his shoulders. His forehead was Websterian in its intellectual massiveness. His countenance, cast in the grand and beautiful Plutonian mold, showed perfect self-poise, inflexible resolution, and an iron will, yet softened with an expression of great kindliness and benevolence. His eyes were large and gleamed beneath their dark, overhanging brows like glittering steel, their expression imperious and commanding, yet at times softened with a gentle and winsome look. His complexion was like the hue of an ancient Corinthian bronze. His voice was deep, powerful, and resonant, as the tone of an organ. The air of immense and irresistible power surrounding him impressed me with a feeling of almost awe, but his charming courtesy of manner, winning gentleness, and almost magnetic attraction at once awakened my confidence and esteem. "Lieutenant Hamilton," he said, warmly pressing my hand, "I cannot express to you the pleasure I feel in meeting a representative of our nearest brother world, younger in years, but larger in youthful growth than ours. Oft have I gazed at eventide on your world, our bright and beauteous evening star, and in fancy's dreams have pictured its great races, nations, and kingdoms, their daily lives, their hopes and joys, struggles, aspirations, and final destinies. All honor to that brave planetary navigator, whose brilliant genius has converted these interplanetary magnetic streams into great highways, uniting distant worlds, over which his chariot flies on wings swifter than light. Proudly do we Martians hail this glorious union of brother worlds. May they never be dissevered, but united in still closer and firmer fraternal bonds throughout all times. Proudly do we hail this first advent of an inhabitant of our brother Earth to our world of Mars. Highly do we appreciate this distinguished honor, and applaud the courage and daring you have exhibited in traversing these awful abysses of space, this infinite ethereal ocean, within whose depths stars, suns, and planets roll." I replied to Leif's courtly salutations in terms as polite as I could command. After a short conversation, the invited guests arrived, to whom I was introduced. They comprised members of the royal cabinet, naval and military officers of high rank, scientists, and members of the learned professions. All were of the pure Plutonian, or Orungian and Rohitan races, no representatives of the Pluto-Martian race being present. Our party numbered 20, including Lord Montalbar and Duke Armatoff. The master of ceremonies announced the hour for dinner. The great door of the sub-salon were opened, and escorted by the host, we entered the splendid dining hall. The banquet was magnificent, the menu everything that could be desired. New and charming surprises appeared on every hand. Our great Webster once said that a well-appointed dinner was the climax of civilization. And certainly this quiet little repast of 20 covers was the chef d'oeuvre of royal Martian elegance and refinement. The Minister of State was the most delightful of hosts. I was surrounded by a galaxy of intellects, bright as diamonds, deep as the seas, and clear as the pellucid Martian skies. It was wonderful to see with what ease and precision every topic touched upon, however profound and intricate, was unravelled of perplexities and cleared of obscurities. Philosophy, law, politics, ethics, literature, poetry, art, music, and drama were discussed with marvelous thoroughness, and embellished with brilliant flashes of wit and repartee. There was no tiresome platitudes, senseless chit-chat, or society gossip, but swift and brilliant thought, embellished by felicitous illustration and happy anecdote, ruled the hour. And the feast of reason and flow of soul that ran around the board was like the outpouring of glittering streams of mental jewels flashed from brains whose cells were mines of intellectual wealth and gardens of beauty. At the request of Alif, I briefly described our world, its physical and geographical divisions, great continents and oceans, its nations, races, and kingdoms, its various forms of religion and government. I described the power, wealth, progress, and wonderful achievements of the dominant white race, and wound up with an enthusiastic eulogium on my native land, the greatest and happiest republic on the face of the terrestrial globe. To all of which my audience listened with absorbing interest, expressing their astonishment that a world so much younger than theirs could have attained such great progress within the short space of 6,000 years. "Your world is yet very young," said Alif. "Still in its adolescence, your race is growing to early and vigorous manhood. A great and glorious future is before you. Our world and race have passed their prime, and are on the decline. You have scarce unfolded the spring flower of promise, and the fruit is yet to come. We are in the sere and yellow leaf, like the old oak whose strong arms have weathered the storms of many centuries. Now, alas, our leaves and branches fall one by one, and we witness the infancy and the rise of your young world with mingled pride, joy, and sorrow. Such is the destiny of all the worlds of the universe. Such is their rise, progress, culmination, and downfall. The same fate that awaits our world in the not far distant future awaits yours." "Heaven grant that untold ages may yet roll on, ere that dark day dawns on Mars or Earth," I replied. "Amen," said he. "Yet that hour will surely come when your descendants will witness the destruction of this Martian world, as our ancestors witnessed the doom of that great and glorious planet Pluto 6,000 years ago, and whose asteroidal fragments now revolve around the solar luminary. As the ages pass on, the planet Venus, now in its infancy, and inhabited only by the lower forms of animal and vegetable life, will become the abode of the Venetian man, who, in his turn, will pass through the successive stages of development and progress, and at last witness the final downfall of your world, which will but prefigure the destruction of his own, and all the worlds of our system yet to be inhabited." The banquet concluded, the guests departed, and we retired to our apartments. The next day we took a trip with Alif and a few friends in his air chariot over the city and surrounding country, visiting many places of interest with which this remarkable kingdom and planet abounds. Towards the close of the day, Lord Montabar having gone to visit one of the cabinet officers, I spent the evening with Alif in his private apartments. In the course of our conversation, I asked how long he had held the premiership of the realm. 50 years ago, he replied, I was placed in this arduous and responsible office by the present emperor's father. 50 years, I exclaimed. You will perhaps hardly believe me when I inform you that I am in my 80th year. I was astonished. Alif looked like a man in the prime of his life, about 45. Our Plutonian race are very long-lived and retain their bodily and mental powers to the last. After reaching our prime, we seldom show the marks of advancing years. Such a phenomenon as decrepit old Martian or Plutonian of pure blood was never seen. The secret is that, for generations past, our ancestors have strictly obeyed the laws of mental and physical hygiene. If no accident happens to me, I shall probably survive to 100, then fall like the frost-stricken autumn leaf. 'Tis my ardent desire that my life may be prolonged till I see this kingdom raised to that elevation of moral excellence which had been the one great and absorbing object of my life to achieve. I begged Alif to give me a short sketch of his career as premier. My ancestors, though poor and humble, were of royal Plutonian blood and fulfilled their duties to the Pluto-Martian masters with honesty and fidelity. When I was appointed to the premiership of this kingdom, I found it in a frightful state of confusion, discord, and lawlessness. The king was helpless. The nobles were immersed in pleasure and luxury, lawless and oppressive. The people were practically slaves, crushed beneath the heel of cruel tyrants. Science and art were dead. Commerce and trade languished to their lowest ebb. I felt appalled at the magnitude of the task imposed upon me, nor can I describe the fearful conflicts and revolutions through which this kingdom passed for nearly a half century. I stood between a haughty and lawless nobility and a downtrodden people. I was compelled to wield my power with an iron hand. Success finally crowned my efforts. I restored order, checked the oppression of the nobles, gave new life to commerce and trade, confirmed harmonious relations with surrounding nations, established justice and obedience to law, fostered and gave new impetus to education, science, and arts. And I have raised this great kingdom to its present station of power, prosperity, wealth, and grandeur among nations. I have the confidence and love of the people and of my king. But the nobles hate me, because I have curtailed their unjust emoluments and checked their oppressions. My enemies call me ambitious, unscrupulous, tyrannical. So I am, and ever shall be, where justice, truth, virtue, the peace and prosperity of a people are at stake. There are times when one has to fight the devil with his own weapons. When you are threatened by open and secret enemies, you must circumvent treachery with countercraft. You must overwhelm cruelty with oppression and crushing power, and scourge vice and crime with an unsparing hand. My conscience approves my acts, and I am content to await the verdict of posterity. Much yet remains to be done for this kingdom. The unfortunate King Probitus is in his last illness. In the event of his death, Diosvar will be king. The career of this prince has been a source of great anxiety and grief to his father. He has no regard for the truth, honor, nor virtue, is thoroughly corrupt, demoralized. His disposition is deceitful, treacherous, and cruel, and he takes no pleasure in anything save the gratification of his animal appetites and propensities. When he assumes the scepter, I have every reason to fear the worst for this kingdom. He will give loose reins to his evil inclinations and wicked ambition, surround himself with counselors and advisors as corrupt as himself, and whom he can bend to his will. His dissolute conduct and examples will produce great demoralization of manners. He will foment hostilities with surrounding nations, and plunge this kingdom into war and bloodshed, which must inevitably end in its final dissolution. Heaven grant I may not live to see that dark and dreadful day. We now entered the inner apartment. In the course of conversation, I informed Elif of what I had heard concerning the power he was said to possess over the elements and forces of nature, and although the subject was a rather delicate one to touch upon, still I made bold to do it, and informed him I had been told that certain theologians had explained it on the assumption that he was in league with the powers of darkness, in other words, of Satan. Elif broke into a merry peal of laughter. "Oh, yes, I've heard of it often. It's quite amusing. If I had sought notoriety in that direction, I might be disposed to compliment my theological friends for their efforts on my behalf. It was only one of the many evidences, however, of inherent tendency towards superstition, still lingering and sometimes ludicrously apparent even in the highly cultivated minds. Whenever they happen to see phenomenon they cannot explain by natural causes or laws, they call it supernatural, and attribute it either to celestial or infernal influences. And I am not quite holy enough to claim the former. My theological friends assume the latter. Well, let them hold to that opinion, if it suits their fancy. It's of little consequence to me. 'Tis true, I do possess certain powers or influences over a few of nature's workings, her laws and forces, to the degree beyond that possessed by any other man in the kingdom. These powers may be termed superhuman, but it does not therefore follow that they are supernatural or need to be relegated to the domain of the celestial or infernal. Whatever this power is that I possess, its nature or laws, I know not. It cannot be explained on any theory of electricity, magnetism, or what you would call spiritualism, or theophosy, electrobibliography, idyllic forces, or any such diabla as witchcraft, black art, or any mumbo-jumbo jugglery. In the exercise of it, I simply will it to do. In other words, I will to have the act accomplished, and it is done. You may be quite sure I never employ this power but for good. Were I were I bad enough to misuse it for selfish or evil purposes, I should be soon deprived of it, as I would deserve to be. I sometimes exhibit striking manifestations of it to impress the ignorant or overawe my enemies with wholesome fear. During my long and arduous struggles to save this kingdom from anarchy and dissolution, I frequently brought it into play, detected many dark plots, and crushed many a conspiracy and outbreak against law and order. I have the ability to delegate a few of my powers to my tried and faithful subordinates, reserving the more striking manifestations of them to my own hands for occasions of great moment. Would you like to witness a few exhibitions of this phenomenon? I would give me great pleasure to witness them, I replied. Alif touched a bell, and an officer of the household entered. Where is Thaumator? He asked. In the tower, Your Excellency, consulting the geolithic tablets and astrological and Christogenic instruments, replied the officer. Announce to him that I desire his presence. The officer bowed and retired. You will now meet an extraordinary man, said Alif. His name is Thaumator. He is dumb and communicates with me by signs. We were seated at a table in the center of the room.